Hey there, this is Matthew Jennings, and on this edition of Peachjar Extra Credit, we are going to be talking about drones. So if your school or district has thought about using a drone, or maybe you're already using a drone and you just have some questions about the ins and the outs, how it works, what are some of the laws, what do you do about training, where do you go for those kind of resources, stick around because I'm here today with Altitude University and we're going to talk about drones. All right, David, thank you so much for joining me here today to talk about drones. This is a question that comes up a lot in school districts, and there's so many nuances and subtleties to the whole topic and the laws and the legal requirements. I'm really happy to download from your brain today. So let's just start with a little bit about yourself, your background, and Altitude University.
Terrific. It's a pleasure to be here, Matt, and I'm very excited to be sharing information about the world of drones with all of your viewers.
It's a big world.
It is. My background is I'm a former Marine. I spent a number of years in the Marine Corps, and after getting out, decided it was time to do something a little different, and stumbled into the world of drones. So I started my own drone company back in 2017 for providing drone services, and then met up with Brandon and the rest of the team here at Altitude University, where I've been part of the team for a few years. So Altitude University is one of the premier online education platforms for getting not only your Part 107, which is the license that a drone pilot needs to fly commercially, but also continued education beyond that license. And we're very proud of having over 17,000 students take our Part 107 course, and we have over a 99% success rate of students passing the FAA's exam on the first try. So,
well, that's great. So thousands of students, which is
yes.
really awesome, and a success rate of 99%, which is really incredible. So. We'll talk more about, if you're looking for training and what some of those options are. We're definitely going to link in the description to Altitude University and the resources that you offer here. But let's just start with licensing. If I'm going to fly a drone, do I need a license? And what is this Part 107 thing?
Well, it really depends.
Okay.
If you're going to fly recreationally, just as somebody who enjoys flying as a hobby, then you don't need a license. Okay. If you're going to do anything that's, as the FAA calls it, for profit, then you do need a license.
Okay.
What's interesting is for profit, we like to think of money, but it's not just money. It could be anything that gives you some sort of a gain. So, for example, if you were using a drone to film something for your school and you wanted to put that on YouTube so that you could get views, that's considered for profit. So you would need a license for that. But if it's just for fun, no, you don't. Anything that's for profit, you need a license.
All right, that's really good example. So if I was going to go out and film some facilities and put those on like the hero banner of my website in hopes that people saw how beautiful our school campuses were, maybe increase enrollment, in that context, there's a gain there. I would need to go through some courses and obtain my license.
Right.
I know there's talk around drone sizes. We have an example here, and there's 249 milligrams. Like, I know there's a drone out there that's 249 milligrams, and it talks about how you don't have to register that particular drone. Does that have anything to do with licensing requirements? Or in this context, if I had that drone, it's considered maybe a toy drone, and I'm out there filming my facilities and things like that for a gain, for marketing purposes, does that change anything at all?
The 250 gram weight limit is where the FAA says you have to register a drone or not, regardless of how you're using it, whether it's for hobby or commercial. However, if you're using the drone for commercial, regardless of its weight, it needs to be registered.
Makes sense.
Yeah, but the registration process is actually really easy. Yeah, it's just a $5 fee, and it takes a couple seconds to go on the FAA site and put the drone serial number in there with your information, and your drone's registered.
That's really great. Yeah, it is really simple, and it's not a big scary thing. I think sometimes people think, I have to register my drone, and they think maybe it's like registering an airplane or something like that. It's really not too difficult. And in fact, registering an airplane is not that difficult either. It's just paperwork you have to fill out, right? And fee, because the government always wants the fee.
Yeah.
So talk to me about, since, it's kind of a nice segue there into the government, like the FAA regulations. How does someone kind of keep up with that? How do you learn? What are some examples of maybe some of the regulations that you're aware of that are just kind of broad that anybody could benefit from knowing?
Well, in general, when you're talking about flying drones, the focus on the FAA side, as well as any responsible pilot, is to keep the aircraft flying safely. We share the skies with crewed aircraft that have people in them, and there's always the risk of anything else you put up in the air can interfere with that, and we certainly wouldn't want to cause a safety issue. So the rules are designed to avoid that. So typically, crewed aircraft, unless they're taking off and landing, stays above 500 feet above the ground level. So for that reason, the FAA, one of the general rules is that a drone cannot go above 400 feet above the ground level. That way there's a little bit of a buffer. So that's one rule. Another rule is not flying over people. That way if something did happen to the drone, it wouldn't fall and hurt somebody. You always have to keep, unless you have special permission, the drone in sight, unaided sight, so you can't be using a set of binoculars or something like that. And then in general, just following the airspace rules related to, obviously certain areas like a military base has restricted parts that you can't just fly anything into. So you have to follow those rules.
Or for example, we're under Class Charlie airspace, I believe, right now for John Wayne.
Right.
So just being kind of aware of what those airspaces are around you, and maybe what some of the airports are around you as well, like military bases and commercial air bases. So the rules change a lot too. Am I right? Like how do people keep up with it, or is it not so daunting? I felt like, and I kind of came into drones, I think, when the government was still trying to figure it out. And at first it was like, you can fly a drone anywhere you want, have, not around airports and stuff like that. But there weren't a lot of rules governing it. And I came in at that time, and it seems like for the past, few years after that, it was just kind of hard and fast. It was really kind of hard to keep up with. Is it still the case? Is it easy to keep up? And how do people stay in tune with what kind of the government's doing around the regulations?
Well, I definitely want to assure you and your viewers that it is not difficult to stay on top of the rules.
Okay, this is good.
Like a lot of government agencies, the FAA moves slowly when it makes changes. I think there was definitely that period you were talking about where if you look at the numbers of registered drones, there's hundreds of thousands of drones that are already registered. So within the relatively short time that drones have been around, their numbers have surpassed the entire 100-year history of the number of crewed aircraft that have been registered. So with so many of those in the air, they had to start acting quickly and restrictively in some cases to ensure safety. So a lot of the rules that are really important for a drone pilot to understand, or anybody flying a drone, even for a hobby, those are what you learn in order to pass the Part 107 exam to get your license. But once you learn that, everything is pretty slow to move. So typically when you see changes in the rules now, they go through a committee where people can comment on it. The public has several months to talk about it and everything. So you see major rule changes really only happen every couple of years. So, once you get into the drone industry, you see all kinds of resources that keep you informed. We have like our YouTube channel that we always talk about rule changes. We have a Facebook community that does that. And there's lots of other platforms where you can get that information. So typically, if there is going to be a big rule change, you'll know it's going to happen months or even years in advance of it actually occurring.
That's great. I know you and I had an opportunity to chat about this just a little bit before we started rolling the cameras. And you mentioned something that's coming down, I believe, in September. For those of you that are in the space now using a drone or maybe considering getting into the game, what was that kind of that ruling that's coming that you feel like they're going to launch about kind of the reporting that drones have to have?
Right. Yeah. So what the FAA was getting a lot of questions from other government agencies, particularly law enforcement, that I'm sure a lot of your viewers have seen the reports of like rogue drones flying over airports or schools or whatnot.
Schools, yes.
Right. And so what the law enforcement agencies were saying is it's very difficult for them to find out who's flying that drone and what their purpose is. So after several years of committees and analyzing what options they had, the FAA came up with a concept they called remote ID. And so starting in last September, they had it that manufacturers selling drones in the U.S. needed to have their drones capable of basically broadcasting the information of where the drone is, where the remote control is, which will tell you where the pilot
is.
and who's flying it. And then a year later, which will be this September 16th of 2023, it's now required for the individual pilot to be able to broadcast that on their drone as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So starting in September 16th specifically of this year, every commercial pilot will need to do that.
Okay, that's good info.
Right.
Another thing that I heard you mention, and I've seen districts do this, and it always kind of makes me wonder, if they did some due diligence here, but it's flying over crowds. I've seen a lot of school districts fly over football games, graduation ceremonies, where you have large gatherings of people, thousands of people in some cases, and you're flying your district drone around, and then, it's beautiful footage, and you put that out there on your website, and it always makes me wonder if kind of due diligence was done on the investigative end of that, to be flying around crowds like that. But I just want kind of those 2 points, new ruling coming down the pike. Also, just be really wary of how you use your drone. And we'll talk about some of that here in just a moment, because I want to ask you some questions about kind of the use of drones and how they can be leveraged in a school district. But one of the things I just want to caution on is that crowd component.
Right.
And when you really think about, even just outside of the legal standpoint, the liability that you would have if something were to go wrong, just on a personal level as a district employee, as that pilot, outside of legal ramifications, I would imagine one would feel pretty devastated if you lost control somehow and you injured somebody that was totally an innocent bystander. So
absolutely, and it is in most cases legally you're not supposed to fly over crowds. And another thing is in a lot of cases when you look at the airspace, whether or not you're allowed to fly, if it's by an airport or whatever, a lot of schools have restricted airspace above them for privacy reasons, and safety of the students. So you could not only be violating the flying over crowd side, but you could also be in airspace that you're not allowed to fly because it's a school, which obviously the events you're talking about would be in that environment.
Yeah, there's where we live right here, and where I fly a little private plane right next to Disneyland, and there's always a perpetual temporary flight restriction around Disneyland. Temporary flight restriction, but it's ongoing into ever. And it's like that for any time I take off. If I take off and I see Angel Stadium is loaded for a game, I have to avoid that.
Right.
Another thing to think about when you're flying a drone, because a lot of times we think just kind of hyper local, our own little space where we're standing, but where that drone may be flying, maybe getting into some other areas like that. Maybe it's a big sporting event just a couple of blocks over that have nothing to do with your school or district. But again, it's that thing about that flight restriction over crowds. So something to be aware of.
For sure. And that's where the importance of training comes in. Because if you're trained properly, you're very aware of how to look that stuff up and make sure that you're always flying safe.
Something I want to talk to you about more too in a second. So let's talk about training real quick, since you brought that topic up. Let's just talk about where, if I'm not a pilot now, I want to be one, I want to start using a drone in my district. Where do I start? Where do I go?
Well, we would always suggest going to Altitude University.
Of course.
But there's plenty of online platforms where you can do courses like ours that are entirely online and self-paced. There are a few schools that'll do in-person training. Typically, that's much more expensive and requires, there's only like set dates that they offer it, and in set cities, usually like major cities around the country. But those are really like your two main options, are the online platforms and then the in-person kind of stuff.
Well, online is certainly a great opportunity. It's always ongoing. Can you, for Altitude University, for example, can I jump in at any time, or are there modules that only launch, at particular times of the year?
Yeah, we've designed ours with the idea that anybody can jump in at any time. Our course for getting your Part 107 license, learning the material, is entirely self-paced.
Okay.
So we have some students that if you really wanted to bite into the material, you could probably complete it in a weekend.
Wow.
If you wanted to do about an hour a day, it would probably take you about 2 weeks to learn the material.
That's great to know.
But you could stop. We have students all the time who they'll stop and then something happens in life, and a year later they'll come back in, and they're ready to continue from where they stopped.
Well, that's great. And that's good to know that it is something that's not as daunting as it kind of, I think, sounds to people. If it's something you can truly knock out in a weekend, if you were just that kind of a student that could really knuckle down and study, that says a lot about how difficult it really is. It is really something that anyone can obtain.
Absolutely. You know, the FAA really designed the Part 107 license with the idea of not making it difficult, but just making sure it's safe. So in a lot of ways, I like to compare it to like a driver's license.
Okay.
You know, and it's even easier than operating a motor vehicle. Yeah. But most of the things you learn are designed to keep you safe while you're operating that vehicle.
Yeah, that's so true. Can you talk to me a little bit about the test? So I go through training, I'm ready for it. Tell me about how that testing part works. Is there a cost associated with that? Where do you go? How does that work? Yeah,
so the way that it works is, once you feel you're ready to take the exam, the FAA has test centers. There's over 800 of them across the country, so you can definitely find one, close to you. And basically, you pay the testing center a $175 fee, and that lets you sign up for a time to take that test. Usually, it's a week or two out from when you pay the fee, and then you take a multiple choice question test, and it's a pass-fail type of thing. And as long as you pass it, you're in.
Okay.
You have your license. It's a little bit of a period for them to send you the paperwork and all that. Okay. But if you don't pass it, you have a little bit of time to wait before you take it again, and then jump back in. But it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
It's there's no mystery about it if you've studied the material. They put out all the information. That's what we base our course off of.
That's great.
And so it's really I think that's one of the reasons we have such a high success rate is they're not designing the test to trick you. It's
not to
designing to make sure you're going to be a safe pilot.
Yeah, to help you be successful. When you go test, and you said it's multiple choice, and of course it's going to take them a couple of weeks, I'm sure, to process that, send you your license once you pass. Do you find out right then and there if you've passed though?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, it's very convenient. You find that out, and if you don't pass, you get a letter that effectively says, you didn't pass. This was your score. Go back and study a little more. Okay,
well, that's great. Yeah, there's nothing worse than waiting on pins and needles to find out if you passed an exam. So it's really great when it's just right there in the moment. So we've talked about kind of, drones that weigh less than 250. We've talked about airspace a little bit. What about weather? I'd like to talk about weather just a little. And, like the wind's aloft, and there's an app I know before you fly. I used it. That really helps like, hey, is this a place I can be right now? Talk to me a little bit about weather and planning there, and then that before you fly app and why that's important and how to use that.
For sure. So again, the focus is always on making sure that you're flying safely. Pretty much any weather app that you look at is going to tell you a couple things that are real important for flying. Okay. One is the weather condition. Is it sunny? Is it going to be rainy? And then the other really important one is the wind. When you're flying a drone, most cases, the manufacturer is going to tell you what the top wind speed is that the drone can safely operate in. Okay. So, a drone like the one right here can probably fly within 18 mile per hour winds or something in that range.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good. So in most cases, you're going to be able to fly safely. But basically what you want to do from a weather standpoint is check to see, is there any kind of precipitation? Because that's going to be a no start for most drones. And then the other thing is anything that affects visibility. So you have to have a certain amount of visibility, 3 nautical miles that you can see. That way there's no way that you're not going to be able to see the drone from a weather standpoint.
Makes sense.
So if something limits that visibility, you can't fly. If there's precipitation, occasionally if it's an extreme temperature type of thing. And then that all relates to the manufacturer's guidelines. So, whatever drone you buy, it'll have specifications on it operates between these temperatures. This is the max wind speed it can go. And you marry that up with the weather report to decide whether weather is a factor or not.
Okay, that's great. And then the app before you fly, how does that help if you're in airspace restrictions, that kind of stuff? Talk to me about that app a little bit more specifically.
Right. So there's all kinds of rules related to what airspace you fly in. There are some areas that you can fly anytime you want in, that they're designated as safe airspaces for drone flight. But then there's other ones that are more difficult to fly in. Like you're never going to fly over the White House or Disneyland.
Makes sense.
You can guarantee those. But then something like an airport, for instance, there are different levels of where you can fly within that. And in some cases, you can get permission to fly over an airport. It's just just a matter of understanding those restrictions. So the Before You Fly app is one that the FAA has put out with a company called Aloft. Okay. And that app will allow you to say, this is the area where I want to fly. This is when I want to fly, and this is these are some of the parameters. This is the height I'm going to fly to, how long I'm going to fly, the radius from the starting point and whatnot. And it'll basically tell you, okay, that specific mission that you want to fly meets the parameters of safe, or it'll say no, it doesn't, because you're going to be over this restricted airspace. And so from there you can decide how you want to proceed as far as getting permission or finding a different space that doesn't have restrictions in it. Yeah,
I love that app, and I imagine anybody that's flying right now is already using that. But if you're not, we'll at least describe that in the description. We'll put a link to it, but it's before the letter B as in Bravo, for you, uniform, and then fly, FLY, Before You Fly, which is, I loved that app. That really helped me a lot, especially in the district that I was using my drone the most in. We were right next to Camp Pendleton, the Marine base. And so you had to be really diligent on what your mission was and where it was you were going to fly, because another place you definitely can't fly is around a Marine base. So you got to be really careful there. But that Before You Fly app is a game changer, and I really enjoyed it. So let's talk about drones for a second. We've got one out here on the table. What model is this we have here?
This is a DJI drone. It's the Mavic 2 Air.
Okay.
It's a little bit of an older drone.
Okay.
But you can get its newer model for probably around $1,000 or so now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. And you had mentioned like something like this can probably fly in winds, up to 18 miles an hour, something like that. I mean, that's
probably about that.
Really good. What about camera qualities? We're shooting like 4K these days. Really good cameras, right? Nice gimbals.
Yeah. It really comes down to the drone that you buy. There are lots of drones on the market, and unfortunately there are a lot that'll say like, oh, this is a fantastic drone and it's only $100, and it's just as good as a $3,000 drone, and there's a reason one drone is $3,000, the other is $100. So I think typically, if a drone that you're looking to do quality filming with, and also have safety features built in, which are great for anything you're doing around a school, like obstacle avoidance sensors and things that make sure you're not going to hit into anything. Those drones are probably starting at around $500-$600.
Okay.
So I would say definitely avoid like the cheaper drones. But anything that's around that price point or more, and especially if you're talking about some of the mainstream brands, which I would say would be DJI, Autel Robotics, and Skydio. Are three of the main ones.
Right.
They're all going to have very high quality cameras. So you're going to be shooting in 4K. You'll probably have on average 20 megapixels, which is more than enough, huge. For what you need. And it'll have a whole suite of built-in software that allows you to do everything from changing all the camera settings to making it easy that if you're not a professional photographer, you can just say, I want you to do a orbit around this, and I want you to put it for this kind of lighting, and it'll take care of it for you.
It's really great. And if you're not flying a drone right now and you're watching this video because you're thinking about adding one to the arsenal, they do have some really great programs built into them so that you can get those really cool effects you've probably seen on YouTube, and you don't have to do anything.
Right.
I will say that my next drone, collision avoidance, is a must. I was using when I was flying a drone for my district, it was years ago, and I didn't have collision avoidance, and I was using one of those automatic modes, and it was supposed to just spiral around a new playground that had just been built, and it sure did. It was beautiful. It was doing a great job until it hit a pine tree about 75 feet up in the air, and that was where it sat. So collision avoidance would have avoided that problem. So for me, collision avoidance is a huge one. I think probably it's just a standard feature now at this point on most models that are on the upper end. That's another reason that you want to be really careful in not trying to get sucked into something that's cheaper just because of budget restraints. Sometimes spending more money on a more higher end model is going to come with safety benefits that are just non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
That really, for the world that we're all working in, is there's no conversation there really. So that collision avoidance is really good. Very cool information just kind of on the brands and some of the things to be aware of. So really appreciate that. That was one of the questions I had, was kind of, what do you suggest? Is there more of an entry level model you would suggest to someone who's kind of getting into the game?
Yeah, I would say DJI is the biggest company on the market. They have a huge chunk of the market share. Probably somewhere depending on who you ask, between 50 and 70% of the market is theirs.
That's good.
So any of their products are usually guaranteed to be pretty good quality.
Okay.
There is a one they have called the Mini 3 Pro. That is out now. Is a very small drone, but has a great camera on it, and
Nice.
you can probably get it for $500 or $600 new. I would recommend that if you're just starting out. And then any of their series of Mavic drones are all excellent for any kind of thing you'd be doing at a school.
Yeah, I like the Maverick. The Mavic series is really great. DJI, I've got experience with DJI as well. I really loved their product. It was great. Even when I got that drone back out of the tree, it worked just fine just afterwards.
Yeah, they're very resilient. They can take a beating, and they're very easy to use. It's very the user interface is great. And when you look at like a Part 107, for instance, the age minimum is 16. So you still have students, like if you're in a high school level, that can benefit from actually getting their license while they're still in school and flying these. So, that's something to look at as well, that for schools that want to train a skill to some of their students, they can do that.
That's really cool. That actually segues nicely into kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about, which is some of the applications that we can leverage if we have a drone in our arsenal at school districts. And you just mentioned a great one, which is, I know there are many school districts across the country that have student interns in like the communications office, and they help the district with photos and videos and putting together, TikToks and, just covering events. And how cool is that if you had students go through a program to get their Part 107 and then they're flying a drone? That's just really fun on a resume. That just is just a neat thing for students anyway. I mean, who doesn't want to play around with a drone? When I was out at the districts filming, the kids would just come and watch.
Right.
There's something about it that just kind of draws people in. It's like if you play guitar, it's just something people are drawn to, right? And so that to me, like your example there, would just be really an outstanding use if you had a student or two on your team that was interested in taking up that process and going through it, and you supported them through that journey. I mean, that's really neat. What are then some of the ways that a school district can leverage a tool like a drone?
Well, I think there's just countless ways, you can look at it. I mean, there's a lot of drones have the programming aspect to them. Okay. So you can teach programming. They're great for STEM and STEAM programs. You can use them on the art side for, just teaching photography. You can use it on the entrepreneur side. Like I said, you can be 16 and having your own business. I mean, it's a far cry from mowing lawns like I did when I was that age, trying to make a few dollars, to where you can be a professional photographer flying a drone and having a marketable license before you even graduate high school. So there's that aspect. And then, it's just a great technology that you can put in front of students and say, let's talk about how we can use this. So a lot of people initially, I think, see drones as like, well, it's essentially a flying camera. But when you look at some of the applications that people are doing around the world, there's drones that deliver medicine to remote regions of countries. There's drones that do mapping for flooding areas and planning stuff out. There's a lot of drones that work with things like geographic information systems for, city planning and whatnot, doing inspections. There's all kinds of things that I think it's an excellent tool to not only play with in the immediate, but also put in front of students and say, what is it that you can do with this technology that you think of that can solve a problem? How can we use a drone to feed the homeless? How can we do photography to better represent this new building we're having constructed? So I think there are a lot of applications that are really only limited to the imagination of the instructors and the students on what you can do with this platform.
That's so true. You said a couple of things there that I just want to touch on that were really great, especially if you're watching this and you're thinking, man, I really like that, but that $5,000, that $1,000 price tag might be limiting because I've got a smaller budget. You mentioned, wow, how great is this in a STEM class or an art class? Partner, with your high school teacher then, and go to the art department chair or the CTE chair and say, hey, I've got a couple ideas here. I want to have a drone for marketing and just promotional value that we have as a district, but I'd really also love to have this for you. And I think having that conversation with them, they'll see the value as well. And wow, I've got students, photography students, that could then leverage a drone, or at least be exposed to how a drone can significantly change the way they're looking at the world through the lens of a camera. That's great. And then, you've got maybe a little additional budget there, because now you're teaming up with someone, and you keep the drone there at the district level, and when they're going to do lessons on it, or they need it, they're using the drone. When you've got a project that's coming up, or you've got a new stadium that's been completed, or a new school building, then you're using the drone. So really good way to kind of partner up there and leverage some additional funds if you're just thinking it might be out of your price range, which is really great. I've also seen districts use it for checking on like facilities. Previous school district I was in just had a unfortunate event, catastrophic, like just building failure. And we were able to fly a drone in to kind of see, hey, is it safe for humans to even go into the space now? Also just facilities, instead of putting guys up on ladders, high up on rooftops or cell towers, you can use drones to capture photos. Have you seen that as well?
Oh, absolutely. That's another great use of drone or UAV technology is, the platform can take a dangerous situation that a person is put into and remove them entirely from that. So, if you look at things like, OSHA numbers, safety statistics, a lot of injuries and unfortunately fatalities are related to falls.
Yeah, falls.
And, if you take a drone, that drone can go much higher than a person without putting anybody at risk. And they can usually get better information. If you put somebody on a roof to inspect whether or not it's leaks, maybe they'll have like a thermal camera, a handheld one, but they're still running around on that roof themselves, and they're taking snapshots. Whereas you can take a drone with a thermal camera and map out that entire roof in, a fraction of the time it would take a person to do it, get all the information you need, and then never at one point put a person at risk.
So true. That's great.
So they're great for taking difficult situations that people normally have to be exposed to and removing them. And even in the larger, like industry and stuff, there's plenty of examples where drones have done that, whether it be cell tower inspections, or you look at like very dangerous situations like, after an earthquake, or like where you had Japan when the nuclear reactor, had all those issues. They sent drones in to inspect it so that people wouldn't be put into harm's way,
Yeah, that's great. And just another caveat there is, if you are looking for someone to partner up budget-wise with to make it a reality for you, lean into your facilities maintenance operations side of the house to see if that's something that they want to also go in on. Chances are, yes, the districts that I've worked in, that side of the house was eager to get their hands on a drone so that they could do exactly that, take a man off a ladder, or take a human body off of the rooftop and put a drone in place. You fly the drone up there to check the air conditioning unit, right? We don't need to send a person up there if we don't have to. Well, that's great. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground today, which is fantastic. I can't thank you enough for kind of just sitting and going through this with me today. Are there any kind of words of advice or parting words of wisdom that you would have, or just kind of those, even for people that might have drones now, just things to keep top of mind as we kind of wrap up?
Absolutely. I think that the important thing to remember is, like any technology, before you get into it, it may seem a little daunting. It may seem like, when you hear tests that I have to take and licenses I have to get and rules that I have to follow and everything, there are hundreds of thousands of pilots licensed in this country, and it's not because it's difficult. It's a very easy process, especially when you go through a school like ours to learn the material. Taking the tests easy, and now drones practically fly themselves. So even if that's something that's a little intimidating, don't worry about it. The technology has more than grown to allow for everybody to be able to experience this. So, we recommend checking out, our site, of course, to get your education, and just realize that there are so many benefits to this technology, and it's really right in front of you that you can grab it. So for those that are looking to join, don't be intimidated. We welcome you to be a part of our drone flying community. And for those who already are, just remember to always fly safely out there and have fun.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, David, for joining me here today. I really appreciate it. This was a wealth of knowledge. Hopefully you found this helpful as well out there. So be sure to like, share, comment, follow for more. We've got a lot more coming at you on Peachjar Extra Credit, professional development, and just about every facet of communications you can imagine. But if you have any questions for us specifically, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll connect with David. I'll make sure we get you some answers. We are going to link to some of the things that we talked about today in the description below, so be sure to check that out. That's all we got for now. David, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. Absolutely.
Take care.
We'll see you.